And there she was, my second ex-Cunard dream ship, the LEONID SOBINOV, patiently waiting, following our somewhat harried and hurried visit to her sister, the fader Shaliapin, which stood sentinel at the other end of the Ukrainian shipyard. We were greeted at the gangway by the Sobinov's former hotel director and the ship's friendly mascot, Bielka. As with the Shaliapin, we entered at the aft restaurant deck foyer, but this time we actually were able to access the former tourist-class dining room, lastly known as the Volga restaurant. It had always been a minimal space, but in the dim lighting it looked especially Spartan. Our camera flashes revealed original oak-frame dining tables, but there were no chairs in sight. The plain white bulkheads still sported their Carmania-era mirrors and carved rope-like moldings, minus the floral curtains that were a decorative trademark of the ship's interior designer, Jean Monroe. Aside from being stripped out and barren, cosmetically this space appeared at least to be in good overall condition. Unlike the Shaliapin, our host patiently awaited us as I captured every angle of the Volga restaurant in no less than 3 formats. And for that I'll always be grateful, as I never had a chance to return to the Sobinov like I did the Shaliapin. A locked grill prevented us from crossing through the galley, so we weren't able to get to the smaller first-class restaurant that was on its forward end before we continued onward.
I think we're going to go up these stairs when you're done.
From there, we headed aft and up the stairs to A deck.
Okay.
It was his cabin.
Oh, really? This was your cabin? Oh, wow.
Yeah, so then I show you my cabin.
Okay.
That was some stuff information.
And not surprisingly, just steps away from the chief purser's cabin was the A-deck purser's office. Illuminated only by our camera flashes, the inboard part of the bureau was in darkness, but behind the scenes there was natural light from the portholes.
No birds in here, huh? No baby birds?
It appeared to have already been rifled through, which is why we didn't find much to save. We headed to the forward staircase and up to promenade deck. All around us, the bulkheads were covered in a cheap vinyl that mimicked wood.
Thank you.
I was told this was done in the last refit at Terrace. Although a little barren, the starboard promenade looked spotless. There were no signs of the leakage and mildew that we saw in the Shaliapin. And even the green turf looked well maintained. As with the Shaliapin, the forward bar was locked, but an open window allowed me to peek in. In the Soviet and Ukrainian era, it was known as the Golden Anchor and later the Zolotoy Yakoy, and had changed little, aside from a more somber color scheme, from its origins as Carmania's St. Lawrence bar. We next headed out to the open terrace on main deck. Those round windows, 2 decks below the bridge, are distinguished from the rectangular windows on the Shaliapin. From there, as our host patiently awaited, we headed out to the tip of the Sobinov's long forecastle for various views of her majestic superstructure, or what I affectionately refer to as her face. Meanwhile, across the basin, the Shaliapin seemed to be saying, "He did that here, too." We stopped for a bit at the crew pool and then climbed the forward deck house for a sweeping panorama of that elegant face.
Please.
Considering that she had been laid up for 3 years, the teak decking looked pretty good, and the shear in this part of the ship was extremely pronounced. Just like on her sister, the John Brown builder's plate tantalized from its mount on the forward superstructure. But unlike her sister, the forward main deck was free of clutter and debris.
Yeah, I know.
How much we were at? I woke up today too.
I know.
We worked our way back to forward promenade deck, making our way to the flower room, which was mostly unchanged from its 1963 incarnation as Carmania's Albany Room. While we were out on the bow, our hosts had settled in on the starboard side of the room, enjoying some cognac and sharing memories of this once proud ship. Over the years, Jean Monroe's once bright color schemes had been redone in shades of drab, but at least her spindly chandeliers remained, now presiding over the dried tendrils of a long since abandoned winter garden. As I was shooting this footage, I remember wishing I spoke Ukrainian, as our hosts were enjoying such a high-spirited conversation in the shadows of the once chic Albany Room. Interestingly, my Cunard brochures and deck plans showed no signs of the bar at the room's forward end, but its style was pure Cunard. Perhaps it was added at the end of her Carmania cruising era. As our hosts continued their conversation, we had a few minutes to explore, so headed back out into the forward vestibule where the bureau was located. This whole part of the ship was a strange combination of the original woodwork and that newfangled paneling. We continued our circuit of the forward promenade and then worked our way over to the port side. Like the starboard side, the port promenade was basically immaculate. As we worked our way aft, we peeked in through the window at the card room. Thus far from everything we had seen, the Sobinov seemed to be in much better shape than the Shaliapin, although it was the other ship that seemed to have any chance of sailing again. We were told the Sobinov's owners were tendering scrap offers if they couldn't secure a last-minute charter. Fortunately for me, scrap metal prices were at a low at the time, but that would soon change. We crossed to the starboard side via the aft promenade deck foyer, where a painting of Leonid Sobinov, the ship's actor-opera singer namesake, once presided over the top of the main staircase. In the dim light of the vestibule, we could make out the unique ceiling recesses that one critic complained looked mouse-eaten when the ship was new. Ah well, to each his own, as I love them, as well as the bent-ply railings, which are a beautifully crafted amalgam of sycamore and walnut veneers. On the starboard side, there was a makeshift counter that was added in the ship's latter years. It appeared to have been a shop or perhaps a cafe. After reuniting with our hosts, we headed aft to the ocean room, which, despite being stripped bare, was still recognizable as Carmania's once chic Nantucket room. Unlike the Fedor's water-damaged ceiling, this ceiling looked in good shape, and I actually preferred the room's Y-shaped grand staircase to the curve of Fedor's, and had I realized that the mural at the top level was actually an original oil painting by the renowned Sidney Smith, a favorite of designer Jean Monroe, I would have spent more time documenting it. At this point, I began to wonder if all the ship's chairs had been stowed in some hold, or perhaps moved over to the Fedor. As I mentioned earlier, we were told at the time that Leonid's spare engine parts and machinery were already being used on the Albatross, the rebuilt Sylvania of 1957. On the upper level, now called the Odessa Bar, the layout was also basically unchanged from Carmania's Island Club. As our hosts congregated on the starboard side, I enjoyed the opportunity to document this space from a variety of angles. During both the Soviet and Cunard eras, this room was the epicenter of many happy memories. Now, of course, I wonder what became of that Sidney Smith painting that was in the backdrop of so many Cunard-era brochures touting life on board the stylish Carmania. Well, I think with all that time allowed, I was able to capture every possible angle of this double-deck space, and yet there was still so much more of the ship to see. From there, we were off to the Midships promenade deck vestibule, where we accessed the balcony level of the cinema theater. In the pitch darkness, I just aimed the cameras in either direction, hoping the flash would work its magic.
Thank you.
A small staircase by the shop led us down to the lower, former tourist class level. It was still such an impressive space, frozen in time from its 1954 Saxonia beginnings. Following our host's flashlights, we next visited the watchman's quarters, where he held up an Australian news clipping of the Sobinov battling some rough seas off Sydney in the mid-70s. I loved how he proudly pointed out the original Clyde-built features in some of the neighboring cabins on main deck.
English. Here English. English. Oh, English.
Facility.
Table English. Here table English.
Facility shower.
No, please, my friend, please.
Okay.
It's good. Here, English.
We even saw the engineers' quarters deep down in the ship, then returned to main deck to visit M29, one of the once stylish suites that were added in 1963.
Okay.
In some respects, its layout and furnishings were a precursor to the ultra-modern QE2 staterooms that debuted in 1968.
Yeah.
In one of the neighboring deluxe cabins, there are original 1954-era cabinets and chairs covered in almost Gothic Soviet upholstery, juxtaposed with that omnipresent Greek vinyl paneling.
Carmania.
Something important and great.
Carmania.
В провинции, вот,
У них
Сильвания была, это все. Залипуха in Russia.
Залипуха?
Yes.
And here, our camera bags make a brief cameo as we moved with them throughout the ship.
This ship is so beautiful.
We then retraced our steps back up the forward stair tower, this time taking it into officers' country. The space originally housing Saxonia's first-class lounge, with those round windows on boat deck, was repurposed as the officers' mess when the ship became Carmania in 1963. It was locked up, but we'd get a quick peek later on. Just as it was with Fedor Shalyapin, the Leonid Sobinov's bridge was a functioning museum of classic British navigation equipment. From that beautifully polished John Hastie wheel to those sound-powered phones, emergency panels, and Siemens brass telegraphs, it was 1954 all over again. Even though this ship was going nowhere but to the breakers, it was so nice to see that she was still being looked after by her doting watchman and his crew. As I mentioned before, I did save most of the equipment from her sister, and while it was of no use to the current iteration of Cunard, at least people can still visit the larger but similar bridge of the Queen Mary in Long Beach, California. Up on her flying bridge with that magnificent view over her bow, there was a gentle breeze as the sun made one of its intermittent cameos. As with the Shalyapin, being idle for 3 years was not doing the ship any favors, although this was not a part of the ship that passengers would have been able to access, so it probably hadn't looked spruce in a long, long time. And despite how weathered she was, I was and still remain smitten with the ship's classic features and proportions, especially that uniquely domed, elegant funnel. On the port bridge wing, the red astroturf had come loose, exposing the weathered teak that would ultimately be used as firewood in India. As you gaze at this remarkable, if long forgotten ship, I just want to take a moment to say thank you for supporting this channel. If you're enjoying these videos, please like, share, and help spread the word. Every little bit helps. Thank you. The afternoon lighting was spectacular on the starboard wing, where the astroturf was actually still clinging to the deck. From the wings, we began to work our way aft, past that remarkable crow's nest, which must have been a lonely and challenging lookout on rough Atlantic crossings. The next level sports deck began with sheltered alcoves beneath the bridge wings. This is where the captain and other key officers resided.
Oh, wait a minute, I don't know if I get in here. I wonder if the door goes to...
Let's try and get in there.
The next deckhouse on this level was home to the former first-class sunroom, a small solarium that was last used as the Crow's Nest Children's Playroom. The port side was closed off, but we did get access to the stripped-out starboard side. The aft bank of windows in the crow's nest looked out to the former first-class games deck, which actually looked in pretty good order, considering. We were given a long leash and enough time to explore as our host reminisced on the bridge. That allowed a chance to visit the funnel platform before we gradually worked our way aft to meet up with them again on the stern. I love that classic teardrop footprint of these towering aluminum structures. From there, we continued aft along more of the former first-class sports deck and all of its nooks and crannies between the deck housings and ventilation gear.
Yeah, we'll get to it. I mean, I'm sure it's open because I hope it's open.
Especially when operating as one-class cruise ships, these two sisters offered up all sorts of nice games deck areas and sunning space.
Okay, I did. Where are they?
The largest open space was the aft portion of sports deck, which had been partially sheltered by glass screens on either side since the Carmania conversion in 1963. That same conversion saw the addition of the ship's gorgeous Lido and heated kidney-shaped pool, which replaced decks cluttered with the cargo gear of her original Saxonia incarnation. I loved every stylish aspect of this part of the ship, including the staircase that led to the boat deck landing and those semi-helix curved stairs that led from there to the aft promenade deck Lido. This was designed at its most functional and aesthetically pleasing. Again, with 3 years of layup considered, I was impressed with the overall condition of this part of the ship versus the Shaliapin's aft decks that were covered in stained and waterlogged astroturf. It puzzled me that the supposedly doomed ship looked so much better. I do have to say that I think the centrally placed bar on the Shaliapin, the ex-Franconia, had the edge on the Sobinov's Lido bar, which was more of an afterthought relegated to the port side of the pool on the Carmania. Imagine this Lido in various paradisical backdrops, providing all those sun-drenched memories over the decades. And there was yet another matching set of helix stairs leading down to more sunning space on the main deck fantail. In every aspect, Cunard's design team nailed it with these Lidos.
Carmania, Carmania.
On aft main deck, we visited the former tourist class promenades that spanned either side. Long before NCL claimed to have the first bowling alleys at sea, Cunard provided them here with a jukebox when this was the Carmania's 10-pin club. The open fantail on aft main deck had a small patch of withered green astroturf in front of the emergency steering station.
Yeah. Can you unwrap me a tape? Yeah.
The polished brass and varnished mahogany were just screaming out from underneath a layer of faded blue paintwork on these beautiful vintage fixtures. From there, it was down yet another level to the aft A-deck mooring area, which was dominated by the stern anchor gear required for navigating the St. Lawrence in her Cunard Liverpool to Montreal service prime. Back up on boat deck, a full circuit here would pretty much enable me to complete documenting the rest of the Sobinov's outer deck areas. These traditional canopied boat decks are another classic feature that has gone the way of the dodo bird. On most new ships, the boats are stowed on a lower deck, sometimes flush with the deck itself, obstructing any view. Up forward, I pointed the camera skyward to get that wing protruding overhead. On the forward terrace, I held the cameras up to a window for a peek into the officers' mess. And since we were right there, I had to get another shot of that glorious builder's plate, and then diverted course for another superstructure shot properly lit by the afternoon sun. After rounding the port side, we re-entered the ship and began to trek through some dark alleyways. At one point, we stopped at another cabin, this one with bunk bedding and a lovely ottoman. Our final stop was the hotel manager's cabin, where in a gesture of extreme kindness, he presented me with the ship's freshly polished engine room builder's plate. As we drove off with Bielka and her canine companion chasing after us, I was literally in a state of shock, overwhelmed by this incredible experience and the hospitality and generosity of these warm-hearted people. I was also sad that our visit was over and that there was little hope for these beautiful and historic ships.
We were with today on our tour.
And now, some 27 years later, my thoughts are with my friends in Odessa.
on.
Alright, hard to port. Hard to starboard, alright.
Leonid Sobinov. This is for davits. Launching instructions for lifeboat. Life ring number 2. Carmania.
Scrap!